Well, we are beginning a new series called Surviving to Tell a Story. Now, this is a story told by journalists who have been in hostile environments, who have covered, let's say, coups, who have covered terrorism and conflict in different parts of Africa. Now, today we are beginning with a very wonderful lady. She has been a journalist for a while now. She has covered some of let's say, horrific stories on the continent of Africa. She has covered conflict, she has covered coups. I'm talking about Peninah Karibe.
Before the arrival of the IDPs, this school had registered 600 students. It is here that Bozizé detained the dissenters and those he considered his political enemies. It is also here that the Seleka rebels operated from when they overthrew Bozizé back in 2013.
Welcome to Kenyan historian Peninah.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it's a great pleasure to have you here. Have you ever been in a situation you look back and say, how did I survive that?
Whew, yes, several times actually. I think the first time I covered proper conflict, the very first time was when Kenya Defense Forces went into Somalia. But that was very brief. I usually don't really count it as among my experiences because I don't think I really experienced that conflict. We were flown in by the military through Garissa into Doble, and we were there for just a few hours, and then we flew back into Kenya. But the first time I truly got to experience a proper conflict zone was 2012. Must have been, I think, maybe June, when the M23 was waging the rebellion in the east of DRC.
Yes.
That was the first time I truly got an experience of what it was like. And I remember I stayed there, the cameraman I had, for, I think it was 3 weeks. Initially, we were supposed to be there for 2 weeks, but then we went in for 3 weeks. And the horrors that we saw, we were at some point embedded with the National Army, the FARDC, the National Army of the DRC.
Yes.
And we were at a place called Ruchuru. At that time, it was actually the Frontline. And it was terrible what we saw because these were soldiers defending their country with absolutely no gear. I mean, they didn't even have bulletproof vests. I remember one of them looked at mine and asked, "What is this?" And we had to actually explain what it was. And I remember he said, can I fire at you and see if it's going to penetrate?
So you are more protected than the person who is supposed to protect you.
Yeah. And I remember seeing quite a good number of them. There was a hill they were calling Mlimambuzi. That was the name of the hill.
Yeah.
And on the other side of that hill was the M23. And M23 seemed better equipped than the FARDC. And there were quite a number of soldiers we saw being brought downhill, and they were dead. And we had to voice our stories in people's homes. There were mud thatched huts, and you'd walk into those huts and there'd be nothing inside. And just out of curiosity, and the people are very generous, you know, and out of curiosity, we would ask, because they speak Swahili, it's a mixture of Swahili and French, but you actually understand what they're saying. And we would ask them, why is there nothing in the house? I mean, it sounds like such a stupid question, but then you also want to understand how these people live, because there'd be nothing in those huts. There'd be absolutely nothing, not a single cup, not a table, nothing. But they have families, and they would tell you they don't have things inside the house because at any point they can get invaded, and they just go. So what they do is basically what those people who gamble say patapotea. You know, it's like at night, let's go in, and in case we don't get invaded, then we have shelter over our roof. Shelter over our heads. Mm-hmm. But they don't have their things there because when the rebels come to attack, they carry whatever they find in their houses. So the things are hidden in the bush. But they come because they have small kids, and it's raining sometimes, and there's mosquitoes, you know, so they hope that it's going to be a peaceful night, and they spend the night there. And the stories were terrible. I don't think I ever encountered any single woman, be it an adult or a child, who hadn't experienced some kind of assault sexual assault, physical assault. I mean, they had horrendous stories to tell. And I remember when we finally drove to Kigali to get our flight back to Nairobi, KQ, I remember I actually boarded, I went up the steps and got into KQ, and Kenya Airways was playing their signature tune. Mm-hmm. And I literally just bawled, like I cried. And I remember my cameraman looking so confused, like, why are you crying? And I hadn't realized it until that point that I was so glad to just be getting out of that environment and be coming back home. And that's what hearing that song that people don't even pay attention to, yes, and being into this plane that had the flag colors of my country, like that is what it represented, that finally I get reprieve. But those people don't get reprieve. But I dare say that wasn't even the worst conflict I covered.
Before we move to another one, there's something you said that I really want to hear about, because I've been to conflict zones, but never on the battlefront the way you are. So you said that at a particular time you saw like bodies of soldiers coming down, being brought down, and you are there covering. Yes, you are on the side of the Congolese army, but seeing some of them dead, it didn't scare you?
It did, Enoch, a lot. Remember, this was the first time. I mean, I'd had experience in local media, but not really conflict-wise, It was just the usual stories that we would do in the local media. Yeah. I never really got the opportunity to cover conflict while I was at NTV. But then this was like the first time I was just thrown into the deep end of it,
It's like war.
Yeah, I mean, you go in there, you're not prepped psychologically. You just know, yes, I'm going to a conflict zone, but I didn't really know what to expect. And I think the reason I cried for me was, you carry a lot of their burdens, because our job is to tell these people's stories, So we talk on their behalf. And for you to tell their story, you have to really experience what they're experiencing. So emotion-wise, they tell you, they show you their scars, they cry when they're speaking to you. You would have to be, a rock to not really feel the emotions that they feel when they're telling you what they've been through. And so you, in the heat of things, in the thick of things, you don't really get time to process what it is you carry every day, that you tell somebody's story, that you interact with these people, that you look at what they're going through. And so, these soldiers that we were with, they were very, very friendly, They were people that we were joking with. I mean, a few hours before they went up that hill, some of them were the people that were asking, what are these vests you have? Are they really bulletproof? Can you really not get hurt by a bullet, And then you see some of these people, because where we were staying, Ruchuru is a very remote part of DRC, as is actually most of DRC that I've been to in the East. I've never really been to Kinshasa. And so there's no hotels. We were staying in a very small place. It had only 6 rooms. I think it was owned by a Catholic church, or it was next to a Catholic church. And they actually would stay there. At least some of their top commanders would. And so in the evening, they'd come, maybe they want to speak to their commander, and they'd come, they'd share a meal, perhaps have a beer or two, and they'd find us editing there. We were CGTN and Al Jazeera, and they'd find us editing there. And our fixer is Congolese, so this is like their brother, And they'd have chit-chat with us most times in the evenings. And that is how we actually would even get to know how things are and where they're heading to the next day. Because then in the midst of that chit-chat and having these conversations in the evening, I mean, you get to know each other, to warm up to each other, and they will tell you, perhaps not much, but they let you know, tomorrow we'll be at such and such a place. Mm-hmm. And so we found ourselves always just, at the front line of this conflict. And so to see, Enoch, it will sound very ignorant, but I think that's the first time I actually saw like a dead body, in my presence, like it's there. This is somebody who was alive and kicking an hour ago. Yes, it was the first time I'd seen that. So you can imagine the impact of that. And so I remember when I came back home, the first thing I did was call home. I called my mom and I called an auntie of mine and I said, we need to pray for these people. Like, that's how much their burden had become my burden, because I almost could relate. Enoch, they look like you, they speak Swahili, not our kind of Swahili, but they are us, you know, and to see what they go through and to think that every day you're here in Nairobi, this beautiful country of ours, which sometimes I feel we really take for granted, and to imagine what they're going through every single day. I think for me, it revealed a side of me that I never knew was there as a journalist. And I guess it would open up a whole debate about, you know, as a journalist, where does your stoicism stop? Or should you even have it in the first place? I don't know really. But I
was in Congo recently.
Yeah.
And let me say I wasn't deep into the conflict like you are. I only went up to, it's called Maundri. It's called what? This Nyiragongo. So I went to up to around Mount Nyiragongo, and what I met are people living in camps. And do you know what I did first when I arrived in Kenya? I posted my photos there, and exactly the same thing you did. I asked people to pray for Congo. Because let me say on my side, I just saw the suffering in camps. So I can imagine what you went through while on the battlefront. But you say this is not the biggest or the worst conflict you've ever covered. Tell me why.
It's so unfortunate because this is a continent we're talking about. The worst for me was, Sikoli, there's so many stories to tell about conflict. The worst for me was Central African Republic.
CAR.
Yes, the CAR.